Okay, so John Clare. Um, Wordsworth wrote poems that do pretty much the same thing, but I find Wordsworth poetry I find to be a little bit exhausting to teach. And John Clare is shorter and really does it kind of better than that poem in particular does it better. Um, I hope you can grasp how insane people thought it was. It's hard because we live in the world that Wordsworth and John Clare and company created. To us, it seems normal to have art be about everyday things, because we're used to the idea of art as a like. Look, if you just John Clare saw something moving in the bushes. He thought it was a bird. It turned out to be a mouse. It looked really weird because there were the little baby mice were attached. And it's like, if you met him for lunch that day, he'd be like, dude, I saw a crazy thing in the bushes today. And he would tell you about it. Nobody before Wordsworth thought that was the kind of thing you should put in a fucking poem. Poems were for historical and cosmic truth about reality and the gods. And here comes, and maybe you could talk about being in love, because that's a pretty big transformative experience in your life, right? That, I mean, falling in love is such a big thing. People write about that. But why the fuck are you writing a poem about some random fucking thing that you saw on the, who gives a shit? Now, there were poems like, sort of like this before Wordsworth, but let me show you, oh, damn it, I turned the page. Anyway, let me show you what makes them different. So Wordsworth, Clare, has his poem. There were people who in the old days would write a poem about a mouse, but look at the last two lines of the poem. So, right, she found her nest again among the hay. So he sees the mouse and it runs away and hides. And he ends the poem with these two lines. The water o'er the pebbles scarce could run, and broad old cesspools glittered in the sun. Now, this is a sonnet, and if you've read a lot of sonnets, and you probably haven't, but if you have, the last two lines, the sonnet tends to do something for a little while, and then the last two lines are the chance to kind of sum it all up. So in a Shakespeare sonnet, for example, he'll have a poem, and then sort of the lesson of the poem, the moral of the story, might be in the last two lines of the sonnet. And that's a very common thing for sonnets to do, is you take the reader on a journey somewhere, and you tell them what you're thinking, and then in the end, you make a conclusion. Like in your essays. Like if you write an essay, you're expected to conclude and be like, here's my main point, right? So there were poems that would do this. And you could write a poem about a mouse 200, 300, 400 years before Wordsworth. But if you did it, it would look like, oh, I saw this mouse, blah, 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 blah. And in conclusion, it taught me a lesson that all of God's creatures, great and small, are important. Or whatever. You put a lesson at the bottom of the poem, because otherwise, why? Like, you know, your teachers, if you write an essay but you don't have a point at the end, they're going to give you a bad grade because they're like, what is your thesis statement? So you could put like a point, but it would have to be like a point about ethics or morality or God or the universe. And you could be like, because, you know, there are stories about animals, right? Like the tortoise and the hare, right? And here's a story about a tortoise and a hare, right? And the tortoise is slow, and the hare, which is a rabbit, is fast. Tortoise is a turtle. So the rabbit and the turtle, and the rabbit's fast, the turtle's slow. And they had a race one day, and you know, the turtle went real slow but steady, and the rabbit was like, I'm going to win this race easy, and he fucked around. And then at the end, he loses, and the moral of the story is slow and steady wins the race, right? So you've heard that kind of thing before. Now, that's a thing about animals. But do you see how the point of it is that, like, they're not trying to teach you about fucking animals. There's a moral to the story that you learn a lesson. The John Clare poem doesn't have anything like that. The mouse, he doesn't say that the mouse is like a metaphor for how we often in life, we see something and we think we know what it is, and later it turns out, I thought it was a bird, and it turns out to be a mouse, and doesn't that teach you something about judging other people by first appearances, and sometimes you may think somebody's a bad person, but if you look closer, they're a good person. He doesn't say anything like that. He says, I saw this thing in the bushes, and it turned out to be a mouse, and it had a bunch of weird babies attached to it, and it was freaky looking, and then, oh, also, there was a little water over the pebbles, and the sunshine glittered off the water. Bye! And that's the end of this fucking poem. That is fucking bonkers that someone would write a poem like that. Still today, we write poems like this. We live in the world that Wordsworth was the guy who said maybe poems could be about something else, and this is the something else he wanted poems to be about. If the poems are not about philosophical truth or love, which is basically a cosmic force like from the gods, like Cupid or Venus. So if poems are not going to be about the truth or love or history or the founding of empire or how to live your life ethically or the cosmic structure of the afterlife and the creation of the fucking universe, what are they going to be about? And nobody could figure it out. Because here's the thing, poems got stuck around. I mentioned Paradise Lost by John Milton. Poems got stuck. People didn't know how to do poems anymore after John Milton, because Homer wrote about the founding of his country and Virgil wrote about the founding of his country. But then Dante and Milton were like, here's what the afterlife looks like, here's the creation of the universe. How could you do anything bigger than write about the structure of the afterlife and the creation of it? Because everybody wants to outdo the guy, like Kanye West, right? They wanted to be better than other people. But once Milton and Dante write about the structure of the afterlife and the creation of the universe, how are you going to get bigger than that? People had a hard time thinking bigger than the creation of their country, and then Milton and Dante were like, let's talk about the creation of the fucking universe. And then everyone was like, I don't know what poems should be about. Pope, who you've read, decided poems could be about lessons. He wrote a poem that's like an essay. So that was one thing you could do. But nobody knew how to, because you couldn't get any bigger. Wordsworth was like, let's go smaller. So if poems are not about truth, and they're not about the power of love, and their transformative power of love, and they're not about history and the founding of empires and the afterlife, what the fuck are they about? Here's the answer. I bet you can guess what I'm going to say. From now on, Wordsworth says, poems are about the author. I'm telling you, John Clare saw something, and he wanted to tell you about it. No one had really ever done that before. Does he have a point? No, he doesn't have a point. He's just telling you about his day. Poems are now about the author. See, when you go back to Virgil and Dante and Homer and Milton, nobody gives a shit about the author. The author wasn't telling you about. The author's job was to communicate eternal truths about history and the universe and the power of love and ethics. But you're not supposed to focus on the author, right? Homer is not a character in the poem. Virgil is not a character in the poem. I mean, Dante is, but that's tricky. But the point is that it's not about them. It's not about the personality of the author. He's just telling you things. He's just a guy who's telling you things that are true. What Wordsworth does is he's like, maybe it's about the author. Let's have it be like. So if you said to Homer, "What's the point of your poem?" He would say, I'm teaching you about the foundation of the country and the gods. Or and Milton and Dante would be like, I'm teaching you about the structure of the afterlife. I'm teaching you about the creation of the universe. I'm teaching you about the founding of the empire, whatever. But if you ask Wordsworth what the poems are about, the answer is me. Hi, I'm Wordsworth. This is a poem about me. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me. And people would go, who the fuck are you? I don't give a shit about you, man. I came here looking for, eternal truth, and you're going to just tell me about the day you had? And Wordsworth is like, yeah, I'm going to tell you about the day that I had. Because it's about authors. This is why he is the first person in the art and author unit. It's Wordsworth says, the poems are now about me. John Clare's poem is about him. He just saw something one day, and he wants to tell you about it. Wordsworth's poems are about him, his mind, his imagination, his life, his emotions, most importantly. He's going to tell you how he feels. John Clare is just telling you shit that he saw, but it's about these guys and what they're looking at. And nobody gave a shit what John Milton felt or Homer thought, or because they were like, they're telling us the truth. Like if you read a history textbook, you're not supposed to learn a lot about the guy that wrote the book. You're supposed to learn about history, not about the author. But Wordsworth changed everything because he was like, now when you read a poem, you're going to find out about the author. Now I'm going to say something crazy next, but think about it and you'll discover that I'm right. Wordsworth, this whole idea that it's interesting to make art just about you, is how you get social media. Without Wordsworth, there's no Facebook, there's no Instagram, there's no Tumblr, there's no Twitter, because all of those things are like, let me just tell you about what's happened. Hey, I went to breakfast. Do you want to see a picture of my breakfast? And they take a picture of your breakfast and they put it on the internet for everybody to see. Who gives a shit? But you see how it's exactly like what John Clare's doing. I saw a fucking weird mouse. I thought I saw something in the bushes and it was moving around. And I didn't know what the fuck. Oh, it was a fucking mouse. It's got a lot of baby mice on it. Also, there was water going over pebbles. Bye. It's just like a photograph. And you could be like, why did you take it? And he'd be like, I don't know. I just thought it was cool. That's what Wordsworth did. He changed the history of poetry forever so that it was no longer primarily about historical, cosmic truth. It was now about the author. Not the author teaching you a lesson, just the author telling you how he feels. See you in the next video.